My name is Philippe Girard, a professor in the history department at McNeese State University.
And I'm Rebecca Harris, a local school teacher and a local theater actress. Welcome to Your Grandma Rocks, where we explore the lives of famous women in history.
Welcome and bienvenue à nos amis francophones. Vous écoutez la radio de l'Université McNeese.
On the program today, music and history as we retrace the tragic life of a young woman. She was from a rural village of India. She got married at a young age and then, she died at the age of 18. Her name was?
Roop Kanwar.
There was nothing particular about her life, but there was something extraordinary about her death. She died by burning herself on the funeral pyre of her deceased husband. And we're not talking about some medieval event set long, long ago. This happened in 1987.
Was her death a suicide by a dutiful widow or something darker, murder, sexism, a stain on modern India? Well, we will investigate the matter along with the history of Sati burning in India. A Sati, S-A-T-I, being a widow who kills herself when her husband passes away.
To lighten up the mood a little, along the way we'll sample songs from India, starting with a song whose title I simply can't pronounce, Chaya Chaya?
I can't help you because I don't speak Hindi either. But you may have seen that song in the movie Dil Se, because the song is part of an extended dance scene that is set on the roof of a moving train. That is classic Bollywood. So here is Shaya Shaya.
चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 सारे इश्क की छाँव चल छैया छैया सारे इश्क की छाँव चल छैया पाँव जन्नत चले चल छैया छैया पाँव जन्नत चले चल छैया चल छैया 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 वो यार है जो खुशबू की तरह जिसकी जुबान उर्दू की तरह मेरी शाम रात मेरी कायनात वो यार मेरा सैया सैया चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 चल छैया 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 छैया.
Bonjour and welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks. Je m'appelle Philippe Girard.
And I'm Rebecca Harris. Today we're exploring the life of Roop Kanwar, the last known woman to die publicly as a Sati in India.
If you're not familiar with that term, a Sati, S-A-T-I, that is a widow in India who killed herself by self-immolation alongside the body of her husband.
In this show, we cover inspiring stories of great women with impressive achievements,
Like Rosalind Franklin, who was a co-discoverer of DNA.
as well as stories that are a bit more frivolous and fun.
Like Constance Cugnot, the model behind one of the most notorious paintings in French art.
And then we also cover the tragic lives of women who died before their time.
Like the Jewish diarist Anne Frank.
Today's story definitely fits in the third category. Before we get to Roop Kanwar's life and death, though, let's first dive into the historical background behind Sati burning. You're the one teaching world history, so you tell us. When did widows start burning themselves in India and why?
I do teach world history, but I'm not an expert on India per se. I just know enough to mention a few things about India in a first-year introductory course.
Don't worry, we just need the 5-minute version to set the stage.
That I can do. The origins of Sati burning, they are pretty mysterious, actually. We have some Greek accounts of suicidal Indian widows going back to 300 BC, around the time when Alexander the Great conquered India. But these accounts are short and secondhand, so it's difficult to know if the practice was widespread at the time or what its purpose was.
It is a Hindu practice, right?
Correct.
And Hinduism already existed in 300 BC.
Oh yes, it's an ancient religion.
So wouldn't early Hindu religious texts tell us about the purpose of this practice then?
Well, that's complicated because there are mentions of Hindu widows killing themselves in all these old Hindu texts, but there are also references to male warriors killing themselves too. So these stories of suicide, they could be isolated tales of gods and heroes, not an actual model that devout Hindus of all stages would be expected to follow. And to this day, Hindu scholars are divided over whether sati burning that is required or even encouraged by religious texts.
A bit like women wearing a veil in Islam, right? I know there are references to female modesty in the Quran, but they're not very clear, so people today are still arguing whether the Quran requires women to wear a hijab or whether there's just a later tradition.
Exactly. So evidence of sati burning, that becomes more prevalent as we move from antiquity to the Middle Ages, because then there are actual tombstones and shrines from the 6th century AD forward, and those reference the practice.
Again, that was specific to Hindus, right?
Well, sati burning in India, that was associated with Hindu women, especially from an upper-class caste background like the Brahmins. But non-Hindus, they had similar practices in the Middle Ages and elsewhere, not just in India. There's a famous account by the Muslim writer Ibn Fadlan. For example, he encountered Vikings in 10th century Russia, and there he described how a Viking chief was burnt alongside one of his female slaves, and she was alive.
So not just a Hindu practice in the Middle Ages.
Right. But that practice then definitely became associated more with Hindus later on during the Muslim conquest of India.
And when would that be?
Well, I'm talking about the Mughal conquest, the Mughal dynasty. So that would be from the 1500s AD to the 1700s. And that's when the practice of burning widows, that seems to have become commonplace in some regions of India.
So back to my original question then. Why did widows burn themselves in Mongol India?
Well, that's a difficult question because, as I mentioned earlier, some devout Hindus may have seen that as a religious requirement. But that also could be a part of the cult of marriage in India, where Hindu women are expected to be so devoted to their husband that when that husband dies, there is no longer any meaning to their life, and it would be best to follow that husband in death as a final act of marital piety. I see you rolling your eyes.
I see that, but why would the practice spread specifically during the time when the Mughals invaded?
Well, that's a good point. During the Muslim conquest, there were instances of johar, which is like sati burning, but on a massive scale, when a whole group of women would kill themselves together when everything seemed lost in the war. For example, when Muslim warriors would invade a town and all the women feared being raped, so they preferred to kill themselves instead. And also there was so much disruption during the Mughal conquest that widows could legitimately fear extreme poverty, starvation, or enslavement. So death by suicide during that traumatic period, that might have seemed like a good way out.
How did the new Muslim rulers of India view the practice?
Well, they came from a society that also put men on a pedestal, where they belong. So Mughal rulers were fascinated by the practice. But burning widows, that is definitely not a Muslim tradition. So Muslims in India, generally, they did not practice sati. And in fact, several Mughal rulers, the Muslim ones, banned the practice because they saw all that as a pagan ritual.
Which would further convince devout Hindus that widow suicide was a uniquely Hindu tradition, which they should practice to emphasize the distinction between them and their Muslim overlords.
As often in history, we may be facing a bundle of factors.
I have a million other questions, but it's time to take another musical break. Do you have some more Bollywood for us?
I do. The sound of our next selection is quite unusual. It's Hindu music flavored with some salsa and reggae. Here's Batman's Deal from the 2013 movie Ye Jawani Hai Diwani.
पुदीना देगा नाक का नागिना देगा चिकनी चमेली देखी चिकना कमीना देगा चांदनी चिडर होके चीट किया तो सारे तारे बोले गिली गिली अक्खा मेरी बात तेरी बात ज्यादा बातें बुरी बात थाली में कटोरा लेकर आलू भात मूरी भात मेरे भी जो किसी ने रिपीट किया तो साला मैंने तेरे मुंह पे मारा मुक्का बदतमीज दिल माने ना बदतमीज दिल माने ना ये जो हाल है सवाल है कमाल है जाने ना बदतमीज दिल माने ना हवा में हवा ना देगा ढिमका वाला ना देगा देखा सीन का सिंगाला खा के शेर का गुराना देखा पूरी दुनिया का गोल गोल चक्कर लेके मैंने दुनिया को मारा धक्का बॉलीवुड हॉलीवुड वेरी वेरी जॉली गुड राय के पहाड़ पर 3 फुटा लीली पुट मेरे पीछे किसी ने रिपीट किया तो साला मैंने तेरे मुंह पे मारा मुक्का अय्याशी के मनवे से खुद को मोड़ना जानना कंबल बेवजह ये शर्म का ओढ़ना जानना जिद पकड़ के खड़ा है कम वक्त छोड़ना जानना बदतमीज दिल बदतमीज दिल बदतमीज दिल माने ना बदतमीज दिल बदतमीज दिल बदतमीज दिल माने ना.
Before our break, we saw how Sati burning goes back at least to the Middle Ages. It became widespread during the rule of the Mongols in the 1500s to the 1700s. If I remember well from your class, after the Mughals, we get to the period of European colonial rule in India, right?
Correct. You were listening. That period for the British, that would be from the mid-1700s to the mid-1900s.
So how did the practice evolve when Europeans showed up on the stage?
Well, the French banned the practice in their settlement in Pondicherry, and the Portuguese did the same in their own town in Goa, India. In both cases, because they found that practice to be barbaric.
What about the British? After all, they were the main colonizers in India.
Well, at first, the British, that really meant the EIC, a private company that came to trade spices and textiles in India and then ended up conquering the whole country. That company, the EIC, was there to make money, not champion women's rights, and they didn't want to upset the locals by messing up with their traditions. So the EIC agents, the nabobs as they were called, they generally looked the other way when they saw something that they didn't like.
So Sati burning continued even after the British took over India?
At first, yes. Again, the British East India Company, that was a business, not a humanitarian group.
Here's a question that's been on the back of my mind. Did those widows kill themselves voluntarily, or were they forced to?
That's the million-dollar question. Obviously, we're talking about hundreds of cases each year, so each story for each woman, that was unique. Some women may have been volunteers, others not so much. And there were probably some who volunteered at first and then tried to escape when the fire started, by which point it was too late.
But some were forced, right?
Yeah, according to European accounts, some Satis were drugged beforehand, or they were tied to the pyre, or in some areas the burning took place deep in a deep pit, and that made it impossible to escape for the women once the fire started.
How horrible.
Some feminist scholars go even one step further and argue that even when Satis were overtly volunteering, they were still the victim of a society that left them no other choice. If killing yourself is expected of you, and your in-laws make it clear that they're not going to support you financially after the death of your husband, well, then the choice to kill yourself, that's not really a choice.
You mentioned the in-laws. Couldn't this whole tradition be something more simple than religion? I mean, women were expected to be financially supported by their husband, right?
Right.
So when the husband died, the in-laws were stuck with an additional mouth to feed. It was pretty convenient at this point to get rid of a sister-in-law by convincing her that suicide was the only honorable thing to do.
That's actually the explanation I find the most convincing of all of them. I may be cynical, but people will do a lot of things for money.
All right, let's cover one last bit of historical background before we move on to Roop Kanwar herself. Obviously, the practice eventually becomes illegal, so when did that happen?
Well, earlier I mentioned that the businessmen of the English East India Company, they were initially reluctant to mess with Hindu practices. But later, other English colonizers, they were more motivated by religious zeal, not profit, and they campaigned against the practice, a man named William Carey in particular. And then there were also local reformers who viewed sati burning as a kind of cruel, backward practice like child marriage that had to be banned so that India could modernize. A man called Ram Mohan Roy would fit that description.
So when did those reformers succeed?
Well, not overnight, but by 1829, the British banned sati burning in most of the areas that they controlled in India. Other areas of India were still ruled by local princes, and they took longer to act, but by 1861, burning sati was banned all over India.
So burning satis was illegal long before India even became independent.
That doesn't mean that it didn't happen occasionally. About 30 satis burned themselves between India's independence in 1947 and the Roop Kanwar case in 1987. But yeah, that was a big step down from the early 1800s before that practice was banned, because back then hundreds of women would have died each year.
Well, I guess we've now established the whole history of sati, which takes us to today's topic, Roop Kanwar, the last victim of this practice in 1987. Let's have our third musical break and we'll get to her. Which Indian musician do you have in mind?
Cliff Richard.
Wait, how is he an Indian musician?
He was born in Lucknow, India. I figure I would include him since we just covered the British colonization of India, and he's a product of that. Here is the song Dreamin'. Bonjour à tous and welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks on KBOS. Je suis Philippe Girard.
And I'm Rebecca Harris, and today we're covering the life and death of Roop Kanwar, the last widow to be publicly burned in India, what is called Sati. By the 1980s, self-immolation was considered a relic of the past.
Except that it wasn't, at least in some rural areas.
Where does our story take place?
Devrala, that's a village of Rajasthan about 100 miles southwest of the capital, New Delhi.
And when was she born?
Oh, not sure, but she died at the age of 18 in 1987, so I would say 1969 or so.
So again, all of that is fairly recent. She was born when astronauts first got to the moon.
Well, that's typical of the duality of modern India, a country that has top-notch engineers, but that's also home to a rural population that abides by very old social customs.
What do we know about Roop Kanwar's upbringing?
I wasn't able to find much when researching the show. I know that she was the youngest of 6 siblings, that she married a local man called Mal Singh in January of 87, and that this husband died of gastroenteritis in September of that year, and so she became a widow after just a few months.
Nothing new here. A lot of women in history left no trace in the archives.
That's right. The vast bulk of what I could find was about her last day on Earth, and even that information was pretty contradictory.
You mean depending on whether people supported Sati or they opposed the practice?
Right.
Okay, well, let's start with the version of events as told by the supporters of Sati.
Well, it's kind of weird. Those people, they gave plenty of details on the deaths of Roop Kanwar to journalists, but then they also claimed that they had not attended the funeral in person at all.
They were just trying to avoid legal problems. So what happened on September 4th, 1987, according to the people who were there, but claimed they weren't, but told the story anyway?
Well, that was a day, just one day, after the death of her husband. And Roop Kanwar followed the body of her husband as he was taken to the cremation site. And according to accounts, she was dressed in her finest and she was reciting the Gayatri mantra.
Which is?
Basically a prayer.
Oh, okay. Did people know what she was planning to do?
Yes. Here's a passage from an article that I found in the Indian press based on interviews from locals. Quote, elders asked her not to go ahead with the sati, but she would not listen to them. When they persisted, she went to her husband's body, whispered something in his ear as elders looked on, and he opened his eyes thrice. And this is what changed the hearts of the village elders, unquote.
And then she threw herself into the fire.
Yes. Again, quoting from that article that was based on interviews from villagers, quote, the folklore goes that her hair or clothes did not burn at first and that she didn't let out a single scream, unquote.
Wow. How many people witnessed the scene?
Well, we're talking thousands of people, basically the entire village.
And no one objected.
Apparently not even local police or government officials.
This goes to show how deeply ingrained the practice was. It also means that the relatives of Roop Kanwar lied. I mean, everyone was there. But then if they lied about being present, what else did they lie about? Did the dead husband really open his eyes 3 times? Did her hair and clothes really not burn?
We're talking about supernatural events there, so no, not in my book.
Well, if all those things are lies, what about the biggest issue of all? Did she really volunteer?
That's where we get to the second alternative narrative of that fateful day in 1987, which we'll cover after our next musical break. And this next song is a bit unusual. It's an Indian song by Panjami MC, Mundianto Bak K, but it's the Jay-Z remix, which you may have heard in the movie The Dictator by Sacha Baron Cohen, because that's part of the soundtrack.
It's the rock in the building. Khalid, what's up, Ramel, what's up, Burrell in the house. Yes. Live from United States, Brooklyn, New York, it's your boy. Young. The nephews is in the house. As soon as the beat drop, we got the streets locked overseas. A Punjabi MC in the rock. I came to see the mommies in the spot. On the count of 3, drop your body like it's hot. 1, young, 2, you. 1, 2, 3, young hoser. Snake charmer, move your body like a snake, mama. Make me wanna put the snake on ya. I'm on my 8th summer, still hot. Young's the 8th wonder. All I do is get bread, yeah. I take wonder. I take one of your chicks straight from under your armpit. The black Brad Pitt. I'm at till 6 in the a.m. All day I'm P-I-M-P. I am simply attached to the track like simply. It's simply good. Young hope, infinitely hood. R-O-C and you don't stop. Kuja BMC and you don't stop. Nigga NYC and we don't stop. It's the rock. It's the rock. R-O-C and we don't stop. Kuja BMC and we don't stop. It's your boy Jay-Z and we don't stop. Nigga R-O-C and we won't stop. I ain't gotta tell you, but it's your boy Ho from the US. You just lay down slow. Catch your boy mingling, England, meddling in the Netherlands, checking in daily under aliases. We rebellious, we back home, screaming leave Iraq alone. But all my soldiers in the field, I will risk you safe return. But only love kills war, when will they learn? It's international hope, been having the flow. Before Bin Laden got Manhattan to blow. Before Ronald Reagan got Manhattan to blow. Before I was cabinet there back and forth. Bro, we had it all day, Poppy in the hallway. Cop one on consignment to give you more, yay. Yeah, but that's another story. But for now, mama, turn it around and let the boy play.
This was Jay-Z, and you're listening to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. I'm Rebecca Harris.
Je suis Philippe Girard. Today we are retracing the life of Roop Kanwar, a young Indian widow who burnt herself alongside the body of her husband in 1987 in what is known as Sati, widow suicide.
Well, suicide or murder. The various accounts you mentioned before our musical break seem highly suspicious to me. Do we have alternative accounts of her death?
Yeah, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of things because the power structure of the village supported her death, so it would be difficult for local witnesses to come out.
Well, take off your historian hat for a second and don't try to verify the evidence and just give me other versions of her death as you found them, straight from the internet.
Well, those versions, they're not pretty. Apparently, Roop Kanwar tried to run away and hide, but then her male relatives found her, beat her up, drugged her, and forced her back to the pyre, and then piled up a bunch of logs on top of her so that she couldn't escape.
So, in that case, murder, and a pretty horrible one at that.
Yes.
So, what was the reaction in India over her death? This made the news, right?
Oh yes, not just in India, but all over the world. I remember hearing about it when I was a kid. The Western press was pretty horrified, but reactions were split in India. Here's what an Indian journalist had to say. Quote, "The reaction in India was an unresolved mixture of shock, admiration, outrage, reverence, and embarrassment over the young girl's action." Unquote.
I'm pretty sure some devout Hindus in small villages thought she was the perfect wife. And more secular people in New Delhi thought she was an embarrassment to the country.
Indian feminists in particular, they looked at the case with horror. India already had a pretty bad record in terms of domestic abuse. It's not uncommon for wives to be beaten, and then the parents of the bride will tell her to accept anything from the husband. But Roop Kanwar's death was worse because it was public. It wasn't like just a husband burning his wife in the kitchen and then claiming that this was a domestic accident. The death of Roop Kanwar was a public ceremony where essentially the whole village publicly endorsed the death and possibly the murder of a widow.
So where did the Indian government stand on the matter?
Well, the same division that you mentioned between rural and urban areas. Local authorities, they had done nothing to prevent the death of Roop Kanwar, as you recall. But the central government of India, they took some legal action. And within weeks of the death of Roop Kanwar, the government passed a new law to ban sati.
And what did the law ban exactly? I'd assume that the murder was already illegal anyway. And if her death was suicide, then it's difficult to outlaw this.
Well, the law took aim at every single aspect of sati burning. So it made it illegal, for example, to encourage or assist somebody doing sati. Or even after the woman dies, it was illegal now to glorify the practice or commemorate it with shrines and festivals and the like.
Which, in a democracy like India, means restricting freedom of religion and freedom of speech in the name of women's rights. Was that law ever applied? Was anyone ever charged with the events connected to her death?
I found plenty of information about this, but I will save this for our last segment. First, one last musical break.
And what's on our list?
We will listen to I Am a Disco Dancer from yet another Indian dance film from 1982. And a note to our listeners, I would recommend that you look up today's other songs on YouTube because they feature some great dance numbers, but not this one.
Why? Is it inappropriate?
No, it's just that I picked a recent remix by Tiger Shroff, who is just ripped. I mean, his abs could cut steel. And that makes the rest of us look bad. So ladies, do not watch the video, please.
Say D, D, say I, say S, C, say O. Disco, 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 disco. To chumo, to nacho, to chumo, to nacho. Hamere saath nacho, gao. Oh, I am a disco dancer. I am a disco dancer. Oh, zindagi mera gaana. मैं इसी का दीवाना तो झूमो तो नाचो आओ मेरे साथ नाचो गाओ I am a disco dancer oh I am a disco dancer yeah ये लोग कहते
Je m'appelle Philippe Girard.
And I'm Rebecca Harris, and today we're retracing the life of Roop Kanwar, who immolated herself on her husband's body in 1987, or very possibly was killed by her relatives as part of the tradition of sati. So let's cycle back to the question I raised earlier. Did anyone face legal consequences for her death?
In a way, yes. There were plenty of lawsuits that were filed after her death. Several relatives were charged with actually murdering her. And that trial took forever, but it finally resulted in a verdict in 2004.
Which was?
Not guilty due to lack of evidence.
Wow.
Then you had a whole bunch of other cases involving that 1987 law that banned commemorations of sati burnings.
That would be easier to prove. Did people publicly glorify her death?
Oh yes, I read plenty of articles in the Indian press of journalists who go to visit the town years or even decades after the events of 1987, and there they encountered plenty of shrines and photos commemorating the sacrifice of Roop Kanwar.
So did anyone ever get punished for glorifying her death?
And again, no. All the lawsuits failed one after the other. The last ongoing case involves 45 people who publicly celebrated the first anniversary of her death.
Wait, that would have been in 1988, and that case is still ongoing?
Yep, the last court hearing that I saw was in 2019, so 30 years later. So hold tight, with any luck, the Indian judicial system may reach a verdict sometimes in the 21st century.
That was kind of a depressing show. Well, at least the poor woman was the last case of Sati burning.
Actually,
What? There were others?
well, that was the last public case, I said. But there have been other cases of women burning themselves since then. And those usually involve women who act on their own after the cremation ceremony has concluded. So it's not Sati per se, but it's still troubling.
Wow, these practices are hard to root out.
But step one is break it out in the open.
Which we did today. We're glad we could share the story of Roop Kanwar with you, however tragic it is. We'll leave you there.